Okay, it is 6:30, so I'm going to call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, July 8th, 2024, and we are at the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Dr. Bush? Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Here. Mr. Pankratz? Present. Ms. Wright? Here. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, here. Board does have a quorum, so I do have that this meeting has been properly noticed, so thank you for doing that, Katie. On our agenda tonight, we do have 6 action items, and then the board will be going into closed session after this standard meeting. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Moving on to a consent calendar. We do have the following donations, so I will read those. $25 from Shatine and Christopher Krieger, a donation to the OMS Band Activity Account. $15 from Laura Burns and Brad Sinner, a donation to the OMS Vocal Music Activity Account. $1,000 from the Vol Real Estate LLC Pure Integrity Homes Scholarship. $1,245.50 for food service balances for students who do not qualify for free and reduced lunch but applied, and that's from the Oregon Area Food Pantry. $100 food service donation from St. John Lutheran's Church Ruth Circle, and then $323.40 for the FOSD Mentor-Mentee lunch from the Oregon from FOSD, and then $4,280 donation to the Netherwood Knoll Building Sound Panels from ASC. So thank you to those individuals and entities for their donations to the Oregon School District. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll make that. I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. All right, moving on to B, information items. First is public comment. Do we have anyone here for public comment? Is there anyone here for public comment? Okay, moving on to OEA report. Is anyone here from the OEA? Don't see anyone, so we will move on to student report. And it is summer, so students obviously will not be here. And then we will move on to C, action items. So first on the agenda for the action items is the 2024-2025 academic standards. So I will turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you, and I am excited to be able to turn this over to our Director of Learning and Student Achievement, Mr. Tanner, and he will be talking to us about the annual requirement that the board approves the use of our academic standards.
All right. Really, it's okay. It's weird because you can't hear. Anyway, yeah, I'll just speak really closely into it. This is sort of a pro forma announcement / approval that we do every year as required by state law at the first board meeting of each fiscal year. So basically, we publish the academic standards to our website. And I'm pleased to say that thanks to Erica, our beautiful new website has the standards linked and posted very nicely. We just basically went through and made sure the links were working, make sure they were pointed to the correct standards, either the state standards or the content-specific standards that are national, such as the physical education national standards or the NGSS, the Next Generation Science Standards. So they are linked there. We are also in the process of developing or publishing the outlines of the Human Growth and Development curriculum, and we do that with a little bit more detail due to recommendations from the Human Growth and Development Advisory Committee that met last year, just to provide more information to parents and community members about what we teach during those. Otherwise, it's a very high-level overview of the standards themselves. So those are all posted and available and checked. So we ask that you would approve them, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the standards.
All right, since this is an annual approval, I'll entertain a motion to put on the floor, and then we can have any discussion.
I move to approve the 2024-2025 academic standards.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off as you're reading the whole motion. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion or questions for John? Go ahead, Mary.
John, do we ever lower the bar on any state standards or metrics that are put out for us to meet?
I can't think of a time that we have.
So by pro forma, you're saying that we are approving the intent to meet all of the state standards or required standards, as the case may be?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to get that clarification. Thank you.
I just have a quick question, and it may not be directly related. Academic standards is different than curriculum, but I guess I was wondering if there's any update on the curriculum, the language arts curriculum for grades 6 through 8. I did go to the website and I saw that we've got the EL curriculum for K through 5 listed, and just was curious on an update related to that.
Yeah, we do actually. So we have decided to adopt a new ELA curriculum for grades 6 through 8. Darcy Jarstead is the one who's been overseeing that, but the decision was made to also use expeditionary learning, or EL, which is the same thing that we adopted in K5. We just completed our first year of adoption. So we're in the process. We just placed the order for the materials last week, I believe, and so we are moving quite quickly to implement that, and we are actually reallocating some of our resources as well to make sure that that happens with good success and a lot of support for the teachers to do that. So yeah, we will be doing a new 6-8 ELA curriculum this year. You're right, it's not exactly related to standards, but it is the curriculum choice that we've made to support success in the ELA standards that the state's put out there.
Any further questions? Okay, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Pinkrutz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thanks, John, and you look very sharp in your Oregon attire tonight.
This is my summer school running around.
It looks good. All right, moving on, 2023-2024 budget adjustments. So I believe that is Mr. Weiland's ballpark.
You bet. So this is also one of those things that we do kind of annually. Usually toward the end of the fiscal year, there's a couple different reasons to do this, as I outlined into the agenda item. One is simply if we don't like to get a little comment in our audit report saying that we exceeded a functional area. Functional areas are those part of the accounting string that basically defines what type of expense is for. So it's not necessarily a salary or a purchase service or a supply or anything. It's actually what kind of purpose it's for. So in my area, I'm the business services area. In a principal's area, it's the office of the principal area. Most of our expenses are in instructional areas or special education. There's functional areas for those things as well. When we allocate money, though, however, sometimes those functional areas could A person could be responsible for multiple functional areas. So they might spend the money over here, but and a little bit less money over there. So because of that, we have to basically kind of adjust and at the end of the year. We're not in this situation, we're not expending more money than we are anticipating to spend. We're just allocating it differently. So all that's is for that. The other component of this is additional spending, and it's because we get additional revenue throughout the year. So obviously in October, we don't know of all the revenue that we're going to be receiving. So there's things that happen. For instance, a large thing that happened this year was a TIF closure in the city of Fitchburg that we ended up having over $1 million increase in revenue associated with that. So those types of things, as well as grants that we received throughout the school year. In one case, our interest earnings, we allocated that a little bit higher so that we could look at purchasing those bus cameras that we talked about a few weeks ago. That's the other purpose of kind of this budget adjustment, is to give us the authority to kind of move forward with those expenditures. In many cases, those expenditures have already happened. For instance, in the situation where we get additional funding in January of every year from the state of Wisconsin for library purchases. It's called the Common School Fund. We don't have any clue really. Well, we have a clue, but we don't have the end number of how much money we're going to get for that. And the thing with this Common School Fund is you have to spend every single penny. If you don't spend every single penny by the end of the fiscal year, you have to give the money back. So we're kind of, in this case, we did already spend those funds because it's past June 30th, and we wanted to make sure that we utilize those funds as best we could in the school libraries. So kind of a combination of a number of different things happening here. We tried to outline those the best that we could within the agenda item. And I guess if anyone has questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
All right, who has questions for Andy? Leslie, I'll start with you.
So in here, one of the things that we got some additional money from was the Jewel settlement.
Yeah.
And you put in here that they'd be an assigned fund. I wondered if you could give us an update if we have had any ways to allocate any of that or not.
We actually did a little pilot project last year with the high school, where we were looking at some sensors that would tell us if vaping was happening within bathrooms. Unfortunately, that's sometimes where it happens, and obviously we don't have any way of knowing necessarily what's going on in there without having people in bathrooms. So we kind of it was an interesting project. It required our administrators to kind of get to that place as fast as they could once the alarm went off. And it was difficult to still figure out what was happening in those situations. So I think we decided to pass on that. I think we're really looking at prevention type of things being, educational things being more of our focus. But I don't know that we have a nailed down plan yet for that.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, additional questions. Go ahead, Troy.
Andy, could you just walk us through the transportation piece? It's the function 25,600. The special ed transportation expense was increased by $225,000, but the overall transportation budget was under.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand how that works out in the table.
So it's hard because in the education fund, the transportation sits within the business administration area, and you'll see that that's slightly up. But there's lots of other things happening in that functional area, so specifically related to open enrollment and those types of things that have changed. Again, open enrollment, we were talking about that a little bit before. It changes based on the number of days that somebody actually goes to school. So we don't have great insight in how that all kind of plays out, and it can change throughout the school year. Do the best that we can, but it does have an impact. So I believe the business service area went up a little bit. Well, what's hiding that $200,000 transfer is the amount of money that's mostly related to open enrollment in that area changing too.
Okay.
And there's probably some other things too, but that's a major player.
Major player. Okay, that's all I had. Thanks.
Other questions? Go ahead, Mary.
Andy, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the TIF funding and the fact that it would be transferred to the Long-Term Capital Improvement Trust. You also have a comment, and I know we've talked about how that will have an impact on the state aid allocation, but I was hoping you could just kind of talk through that a little bit here.
Sure. So we are, a public relations person once said never to say this word, so I'm sorry. I'm going to say this word. Sorry, Krista. Take a breath. There's this thing in state. Well, no, I have to. There's this thing in school finance called negative tertiary aid, which basically means that as you become more property wealthy within a school district, you lose a little bit of state aid when you spend money. So because we're technically spending money by putting this money into this fund, we'll lose a little bit of our state aid for next year. Now we're probably at, I'm trying to remember, 6-7% or something. So 6 or 7 cents on the dollar is what we would lose in state aid. Now there's a couple different ways to look at this. One is we're probably not going to become more property poor in the future. So by doing it now, it's better than doing it in the future, because once it's in that fund, then it has no impact on state aid. So that's another reason districts like to do this, because then when they have a large expenditure, then that, if the money's coming out of this fund, it doesn't impact their state aid. So that's another component. Does that kind of answer your question? I don't want to dive too much.
It does.
Okay.
And my follow-up was exactly that impact is a one-time impact and not an ongoing impact.
Yep.
So, yeah. No, that's perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? Andy, I think it would just be helpful, I know it was in the news recently, just in terms of the initial projections from DPI related to Milwaukee School District.
Yeah.
And in terms of what it showed for the Oregon School District, just losing about $200,000. Can you just explain that a little bit, just in terms of, is that final? Are we still waiting for, kind of what's up in the air there?
Yeah. Milwaukee Public Schools is a large school district in the state of Wisconsin, and the way the state aid is allocated within the state is everybody has to put their expenses into the Department of Public Instruction, and they have to be audited and that type of thing. So usually that happens in late summer, early fall type of thing, and apparently this there have been hurdles for the Milwaukee Public Schools. We're not trying to add on to their burden, but that have limited the ability for them to get their information into the state. So the state has to work based on what the information they have, and it seems like that information hasn't always been accurate. So last year, you probably don't recall this, but there was actually an adjustment in our state aid allocation related to Milwaukee last October from the prior year, which basically had them have more expenses than they thought that they had. And so we had a negative adjustment. This year we're going to get a positive adjustment is what we're being told. But they're also kind of saying, careful, we have to, by state law, provide this estimate, but we don't have all the data in order to basically tell you what exactly your state aid estimate is going to be. So I believe the department has promised us updates through as we go through the summer to figure out kind of where we're going to be. The reason that our state aid estimate is lower than last year is mostly because, honestly, our property values increased so much last year. And we talked a little bit about that during the process last year. So,
Any other questions for Andy about the 23-24 budget adjustments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion then.
I'll make the motion to approve the 2023-2024 budget adjustments.
All right, is there a second? I'll second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thanks, Andy.
you bet.
All right, moving on to 2024-2025 food service prices.
I'm up again.
Back to Andy. Okay.
So this is, again, something that we typically do in July. We like to let our parents know what the pricing is. And based on feedback that you've all provided us over the last year or so, we tried to give a little bit more information, look at history, look at participation rates, those types of things. And also share with you again that we are projected a deficit for this last year. We have gotten the majority of our bills in, but our numbers aren't final. But I'm trying to remember. It looks like about a $185,000 reduction in fund balance this last year. Now, luckily enough, we have over $300,000 in fund balance, or right around $300,000, I think. So we're still going to have some money left in fund balance, and we are trying to kind of right the ship amongst kind of some rough seas, so to speak. The rough seas being prices of food. Is a huge component to that. We've actually been able to reduce labor costs fairly effectively over this last year, while still providing increased wages to the employees that we do have. So we're basically becoming more efficient with our allocations of labor. We've also been able to actually increase participation, and I provide some information in there as well. Also look at what's called it's a tool. It's the food service price adjustment tool. I forget what it's actually called. Let me hear. Paid lunch equity tool that the USDA provides us. They would like actually prices to be at $3.85 on average. So how you figure out the average is you take the number of lunches that you basically sold the prior year at all the different levels, because we have a lower cost for our elementaries because the kids eat a little bit less food than they do at the high school, and you merge those together. And if you do that, last year we were at $3.30, I believe, and what we're recommending now is to go up to $3.45. Obviously, the difference there is 15 cents, and so we'd be adding 15 cents to each of those levels. A question that you've asked in the past is, what does the impact of that do? And if you apply that to the amount of lunches that and breakfasts, we increase those prices to. If you apply that to the number of breakfasts and lunches that we sold last school year, you're looking at about $44,000. I'm doing this from memory now. Yeah, $44,000 increase in revenue. So we're closing the gap a little bit. We are looking to do some creative things at our middle school and Forest Edge with our 5th and 6th graders, where they wouldn't have a third line, so to speak, but the options that we provide on that third line, we would incorporate into the 1st and 2nd lines that the students have. So they shouldn't really lose as much choice as you would think that they would, but there would be a little bit of reduction in choice. That savings, we think, is in that $40,000 range. To do that as well. Hopefully increasing participation a little bit more, and then also the next component of what we're looking at in the future would be perhaps reducing a production kitchen, and that's something that we would be studying this year. That would have some reductions in labor costs as well. So far, we've done all that reduction in labor through attrition, so nobody's actually been laid off or anything like that. We've just, as people have left, we haven't filled or changed the positions so that it reflects what we need more than what we had. So with that said, I will also kind of honk our horn a little bit and say that, we did increase participation this last year fairly significantly, a couple percent around the at all schools, with a couple schools really leading the way, as well as we increased, and this is something that I get into the report a little bit, we increased our free lunch students' participation by a couple percent as well. So that's healthy for us because, quite honestly, we get paid by the federal government a little bit more than actually what we charge our paid parents, caretakers for our students. So that's a healthy thing for us to do as well. And that is also one of the things that is difficult for a school district such as Oregon that has kind of a lower free and reduced lunch population than a lot of other school districts in the state, and even in Dane County. So with that said, I will be happy to take your questions.
All right, questions for Andy about food service prices? Go ahead, Troy.
Andy, just a question on the participation increase. We're summarizing that as about a 6 to 7% increase from last year, but it seems to me that that increase, we kind of took action mid-year last year to do some things to help to increase the participation. So am I remembering that correctly? So point being that when we look at next year's overall budget, that we should actually see maybe more than a 6 to 7% increase in dollars, because it would be, all things equal, that would be carried through the entire fiscal year?
That's an assumption that we could make within the budget. Food service is one of those things that I don't get too excited necessarily about, because it's just going to play itself out the way it does, right? So, and I'm usually a fairly conservative budgeter because nobody likes surprises on the negative side. I'd rather say, hey, we might need, we're going to use a larger amount of fund balance, and then come back to you and say, hey, we're not going to use quite as much as we had originally had thought. But yeah, I would definitely be budgeting an increase of participation. I don't know if that'd go more than that 5, 6, 7% range than what we're doing. We're trying our darndest, but to continue increasing that participation rate is going to become harder too. It's kind of like blowing air into a balloon, right? As you get closer to capacity, there's more resistance to it.
Understood. Yeah, understood. I was just thinking of it from a annual rate. If you
include
that over the entire year, it's going to be a slightly larger dollar.
Yeah, without growing it, what you're saying is the changes that you would make play out a little bit longer. Yep, that's a fair point.
Additional questions? Go ahead, Anna.
As a follow-up, a little bit to that off of Troy's, with the, what is the expected drawdown from the fund balance? So right now we'd be at, the fund balance is at 154,000. If we expect to receive an additional $44,000 in revenue, then what does that drop the fund balance down to at the end of the school year?
I'm hoping that, and I'll spend a little bit more time on that as we build the budget, but I'm hoping to show, maybe getting close to a zero fund balance at the end of the year.
Okay.
With the hope that if we can get to zero at the end of this year, then the following year, maybe we can start growing that fund balance, like we can balance the rest of it and start reestablishing that balance. So my hope would be the remaining, I'm trying to find it right now off the top of my head, 154,000 that we kind of balance things out a little bit, and we still have a little bit of money left in there, $0 to $50,000 left, and then we go from there. There is a thing that I think I alluded to that I didn't put a number to, which is there's a federal supply chain payment that seems to be going away. They don't give us a lot of information about it, but last year I think it was like $80,000. So we're fighting that, because if that goes away completely, then we need to replace that $80,000. So there's a question as to how that's going to play itself out, because they just don't tell us. We just get a big check type of thing. So again, my hope is in the next budget that we have a little bit of money left, and then we've kind of found a balance without whatever the federal level of payments are going to be, with our increase in lunch pricing and breakfast pricing, with a reduction in capital equipment replacement that we did at the middle school. All those things, and an increase of participation, my hope is that we're going to be close to a zero. Which sounds horrible, but I'm just trying to be realistic too.
And I guess to follow up on that a little bit, the 185,000, if we take out the $130,000 equipment purchase, really it was a $55,000 subsidy.
Right. Or
beyond
loss.
the 110 that's accounted for in the referendum.
Yep.
So it's if 55,000 is the subsidy and the 15 cents brings in 44,000,
we're getting close.
We're starting to get to that sweet spot, I guess, where we would be. I have a question about, and this was just in the comparison of the Waunakee School District. There's a note that we don't think they participate in the National School Lunch Program, and I guess I'm just curious, big picture, like what does that allow? What are the benefits, and why wouldn't a school participate in that? I'm just curious, because when you look at the pricing for Waunakee's meals, it looks as though that's the full cost of a meal for their students for lunch, or for lunch. And so I'm just curious why they wouldn't do that, and what the benefits are for us, and or what that looks like, just Yeah.
So we did an analysis of that a number of years ago when we saw that Wanakee was doing this, and I haven't talked to them recently about this particular issue, but what they told us about this years ago was the reason that they didn't want to participate, and I thought it was only at their high school level, so I was really surprised when I looked at the data on the DPI website last week, is they had a very popular coffee shop which was selling things that the USDA wouldn't allow you to sell. So they wanted to continue to be able to sell those things. It was actually operated by students with some special needs as well, and so it was super popular in their community. And then the other component that the Wanakee administration talked about was that they had a lot of athletes that needed more calories than they could provide through the USDA. The USDA limits what you can provide, and so they wanted to be able to eat or serve more food to those students. So those two things were the reasons that they were opting their high school out. The positive to that is they can do whatever they want. The negative to that is they don't get any federal reimbursements. And as I said before, our free and reduced lunch students actually, we get more money from the federal government than we actually charge our parents for the paid category. So they were putting some money on the table. They were putting less money on the table than we were, though, because the percentage of free and reduced lunch students were less than ours.
Right.
So as we did the analysis, we were at a high enough level that we were like, I don't know that we can do that. So what they're doing, this is my understanding based on what they said several years ago, is they're kind of running their own free and reduced lunch population or system by basically charging more to everybody else and then coming up with their own guidelines so that if kids can't afford it,
Yep.
they qualify them as free and reduced
That's
in their
exactly.
world.
Okay, so I have similar questions throughout the
Yep.
rest of these notes of like, okay, are they subsidizing
Yes.
either the low cost of the breakfast or the students that they have qualified as free and reduced? And I'm thinking big picture, like, say we went up to the 57 cents per meal instead of the 15, does that price more families out of lunch?
That's the question.
And then they don't necessarily qualify for free and reduced because it's based on their income, not necessarily the price of the meal itself. So then does that get us into a position where now we would be, if we wanted to consider that, it would probably be a similar situation where we would need to really completely revamp how we're running the lunch program.
And we might have to, because our free and reduced lunch population is higher than Wanakee is,
Yeah.
our prices might need to actually be higher than theirs in
Right.
Wanakee.
Right.
So at some point in time, and when we
Right.
looked at it, again, this was 7 years ago that I looked at it and did some analysis, I was like, it was $100 and some $1,000, I want to say, I'm doing this from memory, that we'd be leaving on the table.
Do they have any numbers on participation? Like, is $6 for a lunch, like, even, are there high school, are kids buying the lunch? I'm
Yeah.
curious if that has impacted the demand.
My guess is that it is. I'd have to go actually and get that data from them, because one of the things with DPI is I can get that data from every other school district that's part of the program, because it's right there, but their data is not there. They're not even listed. So I'd have to get that from them. If you're interested in me talking to them, I talk to them quite often.
Well, I think we're getting close to where we need to be. I just was curious because it's so different than everyone else's, and
Absolutely.
so it sparked my curiosity. So, okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
You bet.
Additional questions? Go ahead. Heather will go and then Mary.
I just have one question on, do we have a sense, I know we don't know the price sensitivity if we raise it 10 cents or 15 cents or 20 cents, so I understand that that's difficult. Do you have the number of if we hit X percentage of usage that we would be in a good place? Like, so we're at X percentage now, but if we could increase that to Y across the board, what is that number where then it's starting to be?
Sure. I'm sure I could figure that out. Off the top of my head, I don't have it.
Yep. I would just be interested, doesn't have to be now, but just as a follow-up to some of the bigger picture things that.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
Because that's my question too, because I see here that we're investigating ways to increase participation of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and then the kids that pay. And, I think you're hearing from the board more driving of data that I think we need to see or would love to see you look at. And I think the other thing in here was, we think that going more than 15 cents increase would maybe impact. What data are we collecting that tells us that? Or what are the numbers that we need to get to into participation so we can close this gap? I mean, if I heard right from Anna, the gap is about $55,000. We're at 44. If we go to 17 cents, are we breaking even? And let's break even if we can break even, if we think 17 cents will get us there. So I guess I'm just looking for more data or more goals associated with the program that, to Heather's point, what are we striving for when we're looking at these programs? If we need to increase participation, by how much, how many? Let's look at free and reduced plus kids that pay full freight. So we can the board can make a really good assessment about what is the number we're trying to close the gap on. And I know it's not, but we talk about things with the budget that if we had $25,000 more dollars, if we had, so I think those are the things that I think you hear the board asking for, if that makes sense.
Sure. The only thing I would say is, last year we increased it 15 cents, and we were able to increase participation a little bit. So that's a good, that's a thing. In the past, the USDA had only said, don't raise it more than 10 cents. So we kind of took that as a risk, and we didn't want to lose the momentum that we had. So that's why we picked 15 cents again this year.
Yeah, I just think we're looking for, our goal is increase it by 10%. Our goal is increase it by 15% and what that gets us. So I think as we move more towards specific goals, that we should tie those to the food service program, I think is what I hear Heather saying and what I'm saying. If that makes sense. Yep.
It's on page 2 on the second page. It says in the second paragraph that we estimate that we would have to raise our prices by 57 cents per meal to get to a break-even place. So we're going up 15 cents. So if we go up, I'm just doing, the quick math here, right? We go up 15 cents in 4 years, we're 60 cents.
So the one
Of course,
thing,
prices will go up too, but.
yeah, you're right. That would be a way to look at it. Yeah.
Sorry, but that's then,
But
if you're
that's-
saying that's 4 years, and that's 3 years of losing.
So that's assuming that
$1,000.
everything is stagnant,
Right,
right?
which it won't be.
So
Right.
we're reducing labor costs through attrition, as well as, looking at reducing some of our expenditures in other areas. So those are the things that are hoping, in my mind, going to get us to closer to kind of a balance point in the next year or two, rather than in 4 years. So.
Heather, you had another question, I believe, and
Yeah.
then Mary.
I was just noticing, I think Anna alluded to this, but on the breakfast of the elementary, is that me? Verona has a 0 on it, and I didn't know what that obviously that means $0, but what can you,
So
do you know
that's-
any more about that?
Sure, that's free, and I believe that's the reduced price, is that right? Or is that just
I don't know, it's
breakfast?
just in a line with all of our, like, we're 215 to 4. That's what I was
Yeah, I
curious.
think they
if
do
just
pre-breakfast
free
at the
breakfast.
elementary
Okay.
level.
In elementary, got it. And then, I'll hold mine because some of this is gonna go into visioning at some point, so we'll just stop.
Okay, Mary.
So, when we increase our cost, does the cost to the free and reduced participants increase, or does the federal government cover, for example, up to the USDA?
No, they only provide us with whatever the dollar amount is that they provide us per email, per meal, not email, meal. If we increase our cost by 15 cents, they aren't going to take on a percentage of that or anything. They only pay us whatever the dollar amount that they pay us for.
And that's below the USDA stated target.
Depends on the meal. I'm trying to remember what that dollar amount is. It's actually, it might be right around it, for instance. I think it's right around it.
Okay, all right. So, we're below USDA, obviously, but we are one of the highest in our area, and I
Correct.
realize that we also have a lower percentage of free and reduced participants.
Correct.
Is there a differential? For example, for breakfast participants, are there higher percentages of free and reduced students in breakfast as there is as compared to lunch?
You're really,
Sorry.
yeah, sorry. I can look at that off the top of my, I have that data. I just don't have it at my fingertips at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm just looking for ways to make sure that our free and reduced lunch participants are
Yeah,
accommodated.
and I believe we also increased our breakfast. I'm not sure if I put this in there quite
Yep.
a bit this last year. It's concentrated at a couple schools that I think we're using some techniques that we need to learn from in our other buildings as well.
Okay. I do think that there's a typo. Leslie and I were talking about this beforehand in the page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our recommended prices for the 2024-25 school year. Should that be $370?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was $370 on the graph and then $371 here, so, and that actually includes already the 15,
Yes,
the
yes.
15 cents.
Yeah, I was trying to
Just-
show that it
yeah.
was 15 cents, and it's not adding 15 cents.
Okay, just
Yep.
wanted to confirm
I
that.
apologize for that.
No worries. Okay, I think I'm good, thank you.
Heather, we'll go back to you, and then we'll go to Leslie.
Okay, sorry, I have two more questions. One is, how does à la carte play into our margins?
Into our
or
margins?
adding into revenue?
So it is revenue, right?
Yes, but-
And as I said in the agenda item, we are constantly kind of evaluating products that we can sell, because we are limited to sell only certain products that are smart snack guidelines or something of that nature. But as long as they hit those guidelines, we can sell them, and we can sell them at really any price that we want.
Got it.
So we have been a little bit more aggressive, I'd say, over the last 6-8 months with some of the pricing structures that we've had with those types of products. And we are looking at some other products to see if we can sell them that we know are popular, for instance, at the high school, that would be more market-based, but we also don't want to price ourselves out of the market with that either.
Meaning, when you say we're aggressive, we're able to we're eking the price of that item higher.
Yep. So
I'll-
we don't want to get to the point where we're like
Get-
above
right.
other retail establishments, because honestly, especially at the high school, kids are looking for reasons to leave anyhow, and we don't
Right.
want to give them.
Right. I'll withhold any of my comments about the Smart Snacks since I realize that you do not create those guidelines. My
Nothing to do with them.
Yep. My second question is, and I know you might not have the answer here, but I think what I was starting to get at and where I'm still struggling to figure out is, at some point, if we have, let's say everybody ate lunch, right? That, like, everybody ate,
We'd be good.
we'd be good.
We'd lower the price.
We'd lower the price. Okay. And that's including, obviously, there has to be some additional, like, you can't feed
Right.
all the people with the same staff, but that would take care of this problem. So it's a product of the price and of the participation.
That is my belief, simply because, again, as you go up the participation ladder in the districts in Dane County, as you get to the higher participation districts, for at least free and reduced lunch, you see that the prices kind of are going down.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I believe having the, and there is a fallacy in that we always thought, until you guys asked us to look at it, we always thought that our free and reduced lunch population participates at a higher rate. Well, we found out it's actually fairly similar. So the question is, are those participating at those other districts? But my belief is they are. And so because you can count on them being there, then you're in a better financial position.
But yes, and my question was not just the free and reduced population. It's literally like if
Everybody.
every
Yep.
student in the Oregon School District went through the lunch line,
Yep.
that would not only be good for kids eating, but also for the financial health of the school lunch program.
Yep. Participation helps.
Well, and wasn't that another bonus of going to only a half-hour lunch at the high school? My assumption would be the participation numbers really skyrocketed because kids could not,
Right.
if they lived close, they could get home, but they could not go to Stoughton for lunch,
Right.
and there were other reasons for that, but you know,
That was absolutely
closing
one of our
campus, we have a really good lunch program.
Right.
I'm not advocating for that. I'm not saying, I'm just
Oh,
pointing
front
out to
page.
your, yeah,
Big font.
that was said in jest. Leslie.
Thanks.
So first of all, I just want to say that I applaud the reducing labor through attrition and also like the creative thought process in the reducing a line at FES and RCI for the a la carte, or not a la carte, for the bar lines and the a la carte pricing. So I appreciate that. I would agree with others about the data. On the graph that's above that on page 5, when it talks about the participation difference from 22-23 to 23-24, it would have been wonderful to see like numbers because students don't necessarily stay from one school to the next. So it would have been nice to see if it's the change in those percentages is because of people moving or if it's because of actual students that are, you know, doing participation differently. And I don't doubt that we have an increase. I just wanted to see more of the actual numbers.
So this is participation of those eligible. So just because there's more students in a particular school, that's not.
Okay,
That's
so
not
that's
part of that.
fair, but
Yep.
still seeing those numbers year
Sure.
over year as opposed to just one bar on what's
Yep.
supposed to be 2 different years was kind of confusing to me and would have been more
So
clear the
what,
other way.
and just to be clear, the chart that you're referring to is actually related to free and reduced lunch population.
Yes.
Not everybody, but just the free and reduced
Yep,
lunch.
I understood,
Yep.
yes. And then we had an increase last year when we did 15%, so 4% overall, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think that's where it's at. So yeah, 4% overall, so that's awesome. So the thing I'm concerned about is on the front of the purple, and it's the very last line on the purple, is due to the generosity of our community resulting in the passage of the 2022 referendum, we are able to offer wages that are resulting in a fairly stable food service team. So with that in mind, are we being financially responsible to our community by not pushing to get closer to that balanced self-supporting system the way it's supposed to be farther than that 15 cents? Like if we go to 20 or 25 cents, or even like Krista said, if 17 cents does it, why wouldn't we do that and save our community in the long run? Because we need to be financially accountable to them. And I don't know that I feel like 15 cents is where it needs to be. The other thing I was going to bring up with as I was looking at this, in many of the schools and in our lunch program, but in many of the schools in breakfast as well, they increase the costs from one level to the next. So elementary would be lower and middle and then high. We don't do that in our breakfast program, and I was wondering if there's a reason why we don't choose to do that.
I actually asked the same question to our staff last week, and because I said maybe we should do that, and what they said is a lot of our breakfast options are kind of like prepackaged items, and so my thought process was they might be serving larger servings as they get older, but what our food service staff said was a lot of these things are kind of, they're the same size whether you serve it to the middle school or the high school or the elementary.
And is that true at lunch too? That it's the same
No,
size,
no.
or they do serve larger
Yeah, I think
portions?
there's more portions, there's more options of lunch. You can get bigger scoops, all that kind of stuff happens at the lunch component, but not the breakfast.
And that's why the cost is increased by level?
Yep.
Okay, so then that being said, it bringing back to my point about the 15 cents, $3.71 for a lunch at a high school, or $3.70, I'm sorry, at a
Yep.
lunch for a high school. Name me one place other than their home, and maybe not even there, that they could get a lunch at that price.
Sure.
So either A, everybody should be participating, which I would be all for, yes, absolutely. That's obviously the goal. But if not, why wouldn't we up it a little bit more than that? So we could actually, I mean, they're not gonna go somewhere else and find that cheap of a lunch.
Yeah.
And nutritious to boot.
So I'm kind of, like we threw out the 15 cents. If there's a consensus that we want to go more than the 15 cents, I'm open to that. We obviously approve that, or not approve, we appreciate the thought that you have. we're open to it. The concern is always that we don't want to lose participation in the momentum that we have.
And I agree with that, but I'm not sure that like an additional 5 cents on top of that 15 or something, whatever the board settles on, is going to break that bank, because we saw that increase last year when we increased by 15 cents.
Yep.
Also keeping in mind that groceries are more expensive and everywhere food is more expensive. So we have to be able to be,
Yep.
keep with that. So that's all I have.
Let me just interject a little bit here. Does this have to be approved tonight? I'm just, if it does, yes, okay. If not, is the board open to some additional thought to some of those ideas? Does it have to be approved tonight?
It doesn't have to be. We were going to go out with our registration system at the end of July. Unfortunately, and this is my fault, I'm not going to be here at the next meeting. So I can provide you the information, but I'm kind of, unfortunately, the only person that's available to answer your questions the best that I can, because we don't have we will have a food service director. She begins at the beginning of August, but she won't be here for that board meeting.
And that's just a suggestion. I mean, is there any other questions, or somebody can put a motion on the floor? Or suggest what we do next. So the floor is open.
So on the first page, it says that the good news is that the amount is $54,000 better than we were expecting, right?
At our
What was projected.
meetings, yes.
Right. So, and you explained that you've been able to get some of that from reducing labor costs,
Yep.
increasing participation. My question is, do you have a sense of like where the biggest bang for the buck was? Like, are we going to do better? Because I guess it kind of goes to what people are asking right now. Are we going to, in terms of like making this sustainable and have it so it's paid for, is raising the meal cost going to have that much of an impact versus doing some of the other things in terms of how we structure? Like if we were to think about doing some of the things with like closing a kitchen, right? Or figuring out other ways to reduce labor costs, would that have a bigger impact than raising meal prices? Or do you think, I guess that's, my question originally was, where's the 54,000? What was the biggest contributor to that 54,000 difference?
Boy, I'd have to give that a lot of thought, but my guess is it's probably close to a half and half type of situation. I think to get us out of this, it's not one specific strategy; it's multiple that we kind of fashion together.
So let me throw something out there. If the desire of the board is to see a plan that is specific, that would get us to a break-even point of food service this year or next year, is that something that is of interest to the board? Using what we have here and saying, okay, you've put together some suggestions, a 15-cent increase, consolidating some services, trying to get to a higher level of participation. Does the board want to see that specific plan that will get us to a point of a break even, or do we want to move forward today and say, okay, what's before us is here's what's been put in this proposal, and here's where we get with a 15-cent increase? Go ahead, Anna. There we go.
Yeah, I would like to, I personally would like a little bit more information to understand the break-even point, which I know in the document it's saying that we'd have to increase it by 57 cents per meal to get to the break-even versus the 15 cents. But I'm seeing that a 15-cent increase will bring in additional revenue of $44,000, and then I'm seeing that we really only have maybe then an $11,000 gap. So the numbers right now, the way that they're written here, I'm a little bit lost on what. I guess I'd like to better understand the break-even pricing. I also recognize that, the information that was presented is let's increase it 15 cents for this year and then work for the next school year, the 25-26 school year, with the other pieces that have been talked about, consolidating kitchens, attrition of staff, pricing of a la carte, increasing participation across the board, that all of those things in conjunction with an increased price would get us to that break-even point. So I guess the question I see before the board is, do we want to break even for the next school year by increasing pricing to the right level? Or do we want to accept an additional reduction in our fund balance and play it safe with a little bit, a similar cost increase as last year, with the understanding that the following year we would get to that break even? So that's kind of, I feel like, where I'm at. And I guess I'm not quite sure I'm following the pricing that would be needed to get to that break-even place, just based on the numbers that I'm looking at and the math that I'm doing, which could be I'm making wrong assumptions or whatever. So
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where you're getting the 11,000.
it would be, well, you want me to explain it?
Sure.
So the 185 on the front minus the $130,000 equipment gets us to the
So
$55,000.
there will be some equipment, but not anywhere near that amount. Sure.
Okay. So maybe that $55,000 subsidy isn't fully accurate, but the $55,000 is what I'm getting, but just by saying the 185 minus the 130.
Yep.
And then the increasing 15 cents gets us 44,000 of additional revenue. So that's the 11,000
And then
gap in my mind.
what we haven't, I alluded to it, but I didn't put a number in here, is the price support from the federal government. That's probably in the 70 to 80,000 range that we're anticipating going away.
That is the difference. So you're anticipating that.
We don't know for sure, but
Okay.
it's been getting smaller every time we get a payment.
Okay. So that's what I'm not accounting for. Thank you.
Go ahead, Heather.
Here's my overall thought, but I have a question on the math piece first. I understand the federal piece and I understand some equipment needs. What is 15 cents as a percentage increase to our current average meal price? Like, what percent increase are we passing? If we did 15%, are we 15 cents?
So 330 to
That's
345.
15
So you just
cents.
take
But what
345.
percent? Yeah, I know. I just didn't do the
Take
math.
345 divided by 330, right? 3.3
Yeah.
divided by 3.45. It's backwards, but 4.5%, 4.4%.
And the CPI of this year was
4.2.
0.2. So we're close, right?
Yep.
Like literally. So my thought is, yes, that we need a plan to understand how in the next year to two, whether it's driving participation or increasing more, understanding what the federal government's taking away. But I feel like, in fairness to the community, that we should pass something for this year. I'm just not on board with it being 15 cents. That's my own personal thought, is that I feel like there's room that we could go to 20 cents, and understanding that food costs are rising and we're getting less support. This is not about being aggressive in our pricing. This is not about how can we just take all the money from the community members sending their kids to school eating lunch. This is seriously, if we're spending money on the food service program subsidizing children eating, that we ought to be able to narrow that gap. And then with additional work and time and things that we're doing in visioning committee and other things, that we can better understand a plan going forward. And then my last question is it still true that, because I want to make sure that if I'm saying, 20 cents, for example, that unpaid lunch balances are cleared out? So if somebody doesn't qualify for free and reduced, but that 20 cents increase or 15 cents increase, doesn't matter, is a hardship, that is something that does not, I don't mean it doesn't matter, I mean nobody is being prohibited from eating lunch. Is that true? Nobody's outlawed or prohibited from eating lunch because they can't afford it. There are people who
if their balance is.
Our type A lunch,
The free and reduced,
Yep.
but then there are people who are probably in that buffer that 15 cents or 20 cents or 2 cents more.
I'm just trying to explain the type of lunch.
Okay.
So you could get à la carte. People might be denied grabbing à la carte types of things.
Okay.
But the regular type, what's called the type A lunch, which meets all the USDA
Yep.
requirements, nobody's, that's not taken away from somebody if they get it.
So that's where I'm also, I think we have a little bit of a larger room for increase, not wanting to sacrifice participation, but also wanting to be mindful of what our budget is that I'm somewhere, I think I'd like to be a touch more aggressive. I hate that word because it seems like we're price gouging, but we're not. Stop
What I would
talking.
say though is, I don't want to increase from 15 cents to 20 cents if they could come up with a plan and said, we just need to increase participation by 5% and we're there. And so that's where I'm giving the opportunity to go back and readjust the plan and say, if we just do more recruitment, we can keep everybody at just a 15-cent increase because we can do it in other ways. That was my point in saying, let's have another shot at this proposal to us. But again, that's just me. The board, we're discussing, we're asking clarifying questions and things, and somebody could put a motion on the floor and it could pass or it could fail. I just don't have enough information with this current plan if we can get to, if 15 cents is it. But I think we're now going into discussing a motion that should be on the floor because Gina's giving me side eye. So we should probably get a motion on the floor and go from there. Or if there's no motion to be put on the floor, then this does not pass and they have another chance to put it on our agenda. So does anyone want to make a motion?
Could I just ask a really quick clarifying question of Andy? So I had a question about the free and reduced lunch participation rates. How does that funding work? Is it per meal, or is it once a student, like if a student, their family enrolls in the free and reduced lunch program, are they then covered for the year, or is it based on how many times they eat
No,
a free and reduced
no,
lunch?
it's once they qualify.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess if we have, my thought is another thing that we could think about is if we have families that qualify but aren't participating, how can we get them to participate even if they don't want to take the meal, because we would potentially still see the revenue?
Oh,
Is
I'm
that
sorry,
right?
they do have to take the meal.
Okay.
They do have to take the meal. It's just that there's not a limit or anything like that. Once you qualify, and then we get paid based on how many meals they take.
Okay, that was my question.
My apologize, I didn't answer that right.
Okay, the floor is open. Do I have a motion? Going once? Going twice? Okay, so what happens if we don't have a motion on the action item?
Then the food prices would stay the same as this current year, and
Gina, can you turn your mic on?
Oh, I can try.
then the food prices would stay the same as this current year.
Okay, so what we would need to do is have a motion for some direction.
That would be helpful if giving us direction on what you would like to see, unless you want the prices to stay the same.
A motion.
Ask a point of order.
Yeah, a motion on what we would like to see, i.e. making this up 18 cents, not 15, or what we'd like to see, like, I'm making a motion to review this at the next board meeting, what we'd like to see.
Thank you. I'll try to give more direction. Thank you for the question. So I would say either someone could make a motion as to if you would like to table that, or the president could sum up what she's hearing, and we could bring it back at a next board meeting and give us that direction.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from the board is that we would like this put as an agenda item on the following meeting, given the feedback from the board in terms of seeing more information in order for us to make a decision. And so we will put that, unless there's any objection, we will put it on the July 22nd board meeting. Okay? Okay. Moving on to Policy 711, Health Services. These next two come from the Policy Committee, so we'll start with Policy 711, and I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thank you. So we met on the 25th of June, and we talked through Policy 711 and Policy 712. The two policies have long been kind of interlinked, intertwined. 711 is health services, and 712 has been emergency nursing services, I believe was the title. And so really the biggest change probably is the consolidation into a single policy of 712 entitled School Health and Emergency Nursing Services. There was a fair amount of redundancy and just similarity in scope, so it made sense to combine them into one. And the language is also updated to better reflect current functions and roles, as well as to capture updated legal references. What would you like to add?
That was an excellent summary. Thank you, Dr. Lakuta. The only thing that I would add, and we talked about this quite a bit at the policy meeting, but for the community's benefit, is that the revisions were done with Dr. Shannon Anderson and our school nurses in coordination with Dr. Carolyn Sleeth, who is our medical advisor, and just wanted to thank her because that is a position that she volunteers for us, which we greatly appreciate, and we thank our nurses for their expertise on the policy. You will see policy changes, but then the more I would say significant changes are in the guidelines that are more for our internal procedures, but the board does not approve guidelines, but we just want the board and the community to be aware of those changes.
So the policy committee recommendation is to make 711 obsolete and update 712 to combine the scope of both.
Okay, that motion is on the floor. Since it's from the policy committee, it does not need a second, so the floor is open for discussion. I know most board members were at the policy committee meeting, but are there any other discussion items related to these policies or points that people would like to make? Okay, seeing none, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thanks, Mary. Okay, moving on to our last action item, which is the 2024-2025 Wisconsin School Nutrition Purchasing Resolution. So I believe that's Mr. Wyland again.
I don't really have a ton of information here other than what's presented. This is the same co-op that we've belonged to in the previous years. So you see the resolution that's there. It's 59 other school districts in the state of Wisconsin that participate. And I haven't been overly involved in this group, but I know that Sarah greatly valued the participation.
Okay. Any clarifying questions? Go ahead, Leslie.
Andy, I know you said you don't have a whole lot of information, but I'm wondering if the annual dues stayed the same from year over year?
I believe so. I think it's $300 is what was in the top of my head, so I believe so.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion. Could you turn on your mic there, please?
Yes, I will make that motion.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the approval of the 2024-2025 Wisconsin School Nutrition Purchasing Resolution? Okay, seeing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Dr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. All right, thanks, everybody. Moving on to discussion items, committee reports. So Heather, Vision Steering.
Yes, we are having our meeting tomorrow, actually, so more updates to come.
All right, Policy Committee, Mary.
Our next meeting is the 16th of July at 5:30.
All right, thanks, you guys. And so now we're moving on to F information items. So first is McKinney-Vento update. So I'll turn that over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. Tonight we're presenting to you some information that is part of a requirement for participation in the McKinney-Vento program. Dr. Anderson is going to share some things with you, and I will be bringing her a clicker.
All right. Good evening. Is my microphone on? Okay, perfect. I can never tell. I'm really grateful to be here tonight to spend some time with you to provide you with an update on our McKinney-Vento program. And this is really, this presentation is within the context of a grant that the social workers and I put together 2 school years ago DPI was offering a grant that allowed school districts the opportunity to take a really close look at their programming for students who were identified as homeless. And it was interesting to us that our district had never been audited before. And even though we felt like we were doing a good job, we wanted to jump at this opportunity because we really wanted to make sure that we were identifying students and providing them the services that they deserved to access education in the district. And so just a little bit about the grant. It's a 2-year grant. We are given $15,000 each year. That money has really tight restrictions to support the program and the goals of the program. Part of the grant, we engaged in a self-assessment that helped to guide our goal work. And then this year we completed an audit with DPI, and the 2 people who work in the McKinney-Vento homeless department are fantastic supports. They answer so many questions. I feel really blessed that we have them as a resource to support our families. They provided us with a lot of professional development. They reviewed all of our documents. They helped with the policy. And then our grant over the course of the 2 years has 3 goal areas. The first one's required. And that was, and I hope this is coming back because you recently approved our new policy. So that was a requirement of the grant. And so I feel really good that we have an updated policy in place with a dispute resolution process. So check, you helped with that first part. And then the 2 other areas that we identified was improving our staff training. We're required to do training every year to all school staff. And so we've made some revisions to our training for this coming year. And then we're also working on creating our own Oregon materials, posters, brochures. We've worked with Erica on updating the website and trying to get the identifying criteria out to our community and educating our community. And presenting to you is also part of the grant. Because one of the issues, the context for this grant is that children who probably would qualify for these services aren't getting identified. Wisconsin is under-identified. I think the national average is a little over 2%. Wisconsin's about 1.5%, and we're 0.6 of our students. So making sure that we're identifying students who qualify for this program so they can get the resources they deserve. So I have learning targets for you tonight, 3 of them. The first one, that we all understand what the definition of homeless and unaccompanied homeless youth mean, what the rights of students who qualify for this program are, and what are the supports that we can offer them in the district. And then lastly, a little bit information about our own student population of students who qualify for homelessness in the district. So first, and I'm hoping you're experiencing some deja vu because this is coming right from policy. And it's also through the McKinney-Vento legislation too, so it's based in law. But when we think about a family who qualifies as homelessness, there are 3 criteria that we look at if they do not have fixed, regular, and adequate housing. And the really quick way to define that is, do students go to the same place every single night? Because we want that consistency. And that it's fixed, so like not a car, not a campsite. It needs to sort of be that permanent residency, and it needs to be safe. So a place that doesn't have electricity or a place that has mold isn't going to be a safe location. So it needs to meet all 3 of those criteria. Some examples of what that might actually look like, because it makes sense when you read it, but what does this look like in practice? What we see, and you'll see this later, most of our families are doubled up. So the families have lost housing, they've been evicted, they can't afford housing, so they move in with friends or family, and we call that doubling up. And so that would be a situation where a family would qualify. The next highest number are families who are living in mainly motels or hotels, and they're moving from location to location during the duration of the school district. Might be Airbnbs, same concept. Emergency and transitional housing, so that would be like living in a shelter. We tend to not have very many families in that situation. Living in a place that is not designed for housing, so a car, a campground, that type of thing, or living in conditions that aren't safe. And so we had one family who had a mold issue We had another family who lost their heat in the dead of winter in their rental unit, and they were having issues with the landlord, and it wasn't a safe place to stay. So sometimes the reason is very short term, but once they qualify, they are qualified for services for the rest of the year. A non-example might be this situation. A family decides to close on their house, and then they close on their other house, and there's like that little awkward gap in between. That is not considered homeless because it was really within their control. It wasn't due to a loss of housing. That's just how they chose to do their closing dates for their property. The other term is this idea of unaccompanied homeless youth, and we mainly see this at the high school. So Amy Mitchell, our high school social worker, tends to work with a few of these students every year. So they have the same homeless definition that I just told you about, but they're also not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. So some situations where we've seen that, if a student comes out as gay and their family kick them out of the home, and now they're living with friends or family, they are an unaccompanied youth. And these situations are all things that I have seen in my time in Oregon, because I wanted to give you some examples of what our kids are experiencing. There might be a situation where a student chooses to live with some other family or some other friends because their parents just aren't able to provide them with their basic needs. There might be a situation with abuse, especially for a student who's 18, and it's just gonna finish out their time living with other family. A non-example, however, would be if the family says, you know what, high school senior, you're gonna go to Oregon and you're gonna live with grandma and grandpa so that you can help them with the yard and the snow removal, and we're gonna do that so grandma and grandpa can stay in their home. That type of arrangement where it's to benefit everyone is not considered unaccompanied youth. But every year we do have a few high school students who fall into this category that we're supporting. So the next one are the rights. And there are very clear rights that students have if they qualify. Again, this is straight from policy. You've seen this before. In policy, we talked about enrollment, transportation, their ability to enroll, and two terms that I know some of you had questions about when we looked at it at policy was the right to attend school of origin or school of attendance. And so origin is where they were going to school before they became homeless. Attendance is where they sleep at night. So some of our students' origin and attendance is Oregon. For some of our families, the origin was Oregon, but their attendance is Sun Prairie or Middleton or Verona. We also serve students in the reverse. And so we have students sleeping in the Oregon School District. The highest numbers are at Middleton, Sun Prairie, Verona, and Monona Grove, I believe, are the four highest. So they're very close to us, but we have their students and they have ours during that time. You were just discussing free and reduced lunch. Any student who qualifies is an automatic qualification for free and reduced lunch and breakfast. This is a slide that's actually from our training for staff. We use Schoolhouse Connection as a national resource for a lot of our materials. That's where the infographic comes from. But one of the things that we need to provide is helping our social workers identify students who might qualify for this program. And so we'll talk to staff about, here are some things you might notice, because our paraprofessionals, our bus drivers, our health office staff, our teachers are the ones talking to our kids every day. And so if they start to see a pattern of some of these signs, we want them to go to one of our school social workers so the social workers can do a little bit more digging in collaboration with the family to see if there's additional supports and resources that we can provide them with. We have a fantastic social worker team that really are the ones supporting our students, making sure that they get taxis after track practice, that they're getting their school supplies, that they're getting what they need to access schools. And with the support of this board, next time I present, there's going to be a fifth face up there. We hired Katie Bland as our fifth social worker. And through this shifting, Caitlin Peterson is going to serve more of a coordinator role for our program, just so we can be more consistent and continue to strengthen our program. But a huge shout out to our social workers. They build great relationships with our families and kids so they can access the services that they need. So speaking of additional resources and services, I know that you are aware of a lot of these resources through other presentations in the past, so I'm not going to go through each of them, but the point is we have a really supportive community and a lot of really supportive community resources that are collaborating with us to support our students who are experiencing homelessness, as well as a lot of our students who are experiencing financial needs. And so I'm really grateful for our partnership with the Food Pantry or Joining Forces for Families, and certainly DPI's support with this grant. We also talked to our staff about creating that safe and supportive learning environment. And you hear that in the principals' presentations too, about how important it is to create a space, that sense of belonging. And that is really important for our students experiencing homelessness and trying to really have an assets-based view. We've been doing some professional development around trauma over the course of 3 years. And so bringing that trauma-sensitive school lens to our work with students, thinking about the language that we use. And so having a more assets-based and a person-first language when we talked about families and students and their needs. So just thinking about how to create that sense of community. So lastly, a quick look at our student population. So this is from the last 6 years. So this past year we had 22 students who qualified as homelessness in the Oregon School District. We usually hover around 20. You'll notice a big jump last year. Yes, there were more students, but there were actually more families that had multiple kids than previous years. So there really weren't that many more families, but the families were larger. And then we usually have between 15 and 20 students who are attending other schools, sleeping in Oregon too. And we don't interface with those families. They're really connected to their home school. So why are our students identified? And so we took a look at those 22 students and the breakdown. And as I mentioned before, the vast majority of our students who qualify are doubled up. They're 2 families, 3 families, they're living with parents. And then we have the next population is sort of tied between families who are strictly hotel motel, and then also some that are hotel motel doubled up, kind of going back and forth. And then very rarely we'll have something like I mentioned before, like mold or heat or water damage, fire, that type of thing. When we look at attendance for this population, this is attendance the last 3 years. The light blue is all students compared to our students who qualify. We do have a gap. And it's hard because when you're looking at 22 students, if you have a couple students who really struggle to come to school, it really kind of messes with your data a little bit. But we certainly have students who are homeless who have better attendance than the rate. But I still think it's important to look at that 10,000-foot view. I am not sharing academic data with you for this population because it is so small. So if we only have 1 third grader or 1 student taking the ACT, the academic data becomes very easily identifiable. But it is something that our social workers are monitoring to make sure students are coming to school and get the support and resources that they need. So that was a very quick overview with a highlight of some of our goal work. What questions do you have for me?
Thank you, Shannon. That was really great information. Any questions for Dr. Anderson? Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you for all of your work on this. What's your confidence level that we're identifying most, if not all, of the students that are suffering from homelessness in this district?
Mm-hmm. I think with our grant work and with more community education and more outreach and more materials, we'll identify more families, which will be great. I think our staff does a really good job of coming to our social workers or administrators when they hear things, or, you know, I had a staff member reach out to me today with concerns from summer school about a family that might need support. And so I think our staff is very loving and caring and aware, but I always believe we can do better.
Okay, that's wonderful. And then I would just like to say that in interest of education, I would love to hear a podcast maybe from some experts and you and maybe a social worker or something like that. That would be pretty entertaining for me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Heather.
Yes, thanks for the update on that. Can you go back to the first slide, please? The goals. Got it. Sorry, second.
Oh, sorry.
Unless you want to quiz me on the learning targets. The one with there we go. So this is our first year of 2, or this is our second year of 2?
We're starting our second
We're
year.
starting our second year, and you're probably, maybe you're not able to share, or maybe it's hard to tell, but have you seen measurable success or increase in identifying through this
Not
program?
yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
So year 1 is get your policy done.
Okay, check.
And we met for several hours and had to submit a lot of documentation to DPI, and they let us know, like, here's an opportunity for growth, or this is really solid, and, you know, sharing of resources. So that was really, and then we developed our training so we could try it this coming year.
Okay.
And so I think this next year, I'm curious
where
to
we'll
see,
see.
because our goal is to create and distribute more personalized materials and resources in the community in year 2.
Okay.
So I think it's a little too early.
Got it.
But it's a great question. I'm curious.
Yeah, thanks.
Mary, go ahead.
How have we historically identified the learners who are homeless or unaccompanied? Is it largely staff identification or self identification?
Great question. One thing I didn't mention is we've added, Katie might know how many years we've had it, but we added a couple years ago a question on the registration process. So you might have seen that, those of you who are parents. DPI encouraged us to reword it to make it more clear and sort of more respectful for families. And so any family, when they enroll, can answer a question that will then we get a notification, and then a social worker reaches out to the family to have more of a conversation, to learn more, to determine if they do qualify for the program. Sometimes families will call us and tell us, or the front office will get the phone call. Otherwise, it's really kids talking to their teachers, working next to their paraprofessional. The bus driver notices that they're not on the bus anymore, or, you know what I mean? So it's just through eyes and ears.
I just wanted to say thank you very much.
All right, any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to 2, 3, and 4. I'll turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
Thank you. There's just a slight delay while the flicker is brought up to the front.
I got it.
Thank you.
Now we're both going.
Sorry, whoa! It's okay, because I know what slide it is, and it is the fact that we're moving into our visioning and strategic planning part of our meeting. I think one of the bigger things that I want to report back regarding this segment of what we do together as administrators and board is that last week we brought all of our school leadership teams together to do a shortened, recreated version of what the administrators did at SAIL, in order to ensure that all the teams at each of the schools had an understanding of our areas of focus, had opportunities to give feedback, and could then help craft the message that would be most helpful at their particular building and in their particular context. I think that was a really important step, because administrators can plan and plan and plan. But if it doesn't feel like something that all of the educators who are doing the work in the classroom can get their hands around, then it really doesn't end up impacting our students in the way we want it to. So I'm excited for how well that went last week, and also for what the leadership teams are now in the process of planning for their own schools. And that's related to the goals that are connected to the board priorities. In this particular piece, I want you to take a look. I think this is the first time we've had priority 6 listed here, which is what the board voted on in the workshop in the beginning of the month of June. And that is priority 6, enhancing the educational setting for current and future generations, which of course is connected to planning out the type of facilities and multiple types of uses for our facilities, what we want for our kids in that area, in addition to other ways that you can define educational setting. And of course, our connected goals, will be reporting on those early in the fall. And then we actually have a few things to share in our superintendent's update. And one might think that when the students aren't here, things aren't happening, but actually the students, many of them are back today, and the teachers have been really engaging in quite a bit of professional learning. This is an example of our letters training. This is based on the science of reading and teaches the how, what, and why of literacy acquisition to improve instructional practice and achieve long-term systemic changes in literacy instruction. So we've had several cohorts go through the training. This is this summer's cohort. I think they are proudly handing out, or proudly showing us, I think they're cards with different phonemic configurations on there. That's a part of their training and learning. And then I already spoke about our leadership teams and the sale process. We had quite the full room, and all of our principals participated in the facilitation, as did our district office team. So it really was a case of distributed leadership, and I think it was really helpful for other school leadership teams to interact with principals from other buildings. I think once again it helped everybody understand that even though your school might feel like a separate entity, and sometimes your classroom might feel like a separate entity, in reality we're all connected in a system, and our students have experiences that build one upon another until you reach the portrait of a graduate. And then it's always wonderful to acknowledge when we have our many fabulous alums do something pretty, pretty significant. This is Cameron Swigum. He's from the class of 2016, and he reached for the stars, literally, and is now a lead author on an article that was recently published in Nature, one of the world's leading multidisciplinary science journals. He's currently in his 3rd year PhD program, studying at the University of Vienna in Austria. And he studies the process of star formation by visualizing the 3D dynamics of young stellar clusters that are situated in the local Milky Way. And this is, I remember being Cameron's RCI principal. So it's lovely to see how much he's done in such a short period of time. And his very, very proud mother is one of our colleagues at the district office. And as I mentioned, summer semester began today. It was very exciting, a lot of smiles, a lot of feelings as all the students were welcomed to the high school. From reading and writing to games and puzzles to baking, there are many classes for many different interest levels. And you can see from the picture that we had student interns who wore bright green shirts so they could be picked out of the crowd. And they waited outside in the morning in order to escort young students in and help them find their classes. They helped in classes, and then they were out in the hallways helping to escort students to their classes in the school building. And if you haven't been there, The high school becomes color-coded by flags that are flying from the ceiling. And so students are looking for red and blue and green and orange hallways. And that's a really important way for them to find their way around. And it really does take a village. The principals are there, every district office administrator is there, everybody's got a little, everyone sort of acts like the mama duckling and has several little ones trailing along behind them, and then you drop them off at classes as they find what they're looking for. And it's absolutely delightful. And then a reminder to tune into our podcasts. You see here we have our GSA leaders who spoke about their Pride in the Park event in early June. And then also a segment on our own Mike Derrick, who recently won the Crystal Apple Award. And this Friday, Erica Mundinger and I are presenting in Green Bay on the power of podcasting as one communication strategy among many. And then Erica is off to the National School Public Relations Association conference, where she will be receiving an award for a national level award for some of her work. And I will definitely ask her to put the pictures in one of the next superintendent's updates so that we can enjoy the successes that Erica's had with her really tremendously helpful communication strategies.
Great, thank you. Congratulations, Erica. All right, going into closing future agenda, our next meeting will be July 22nd, and I will move into checkout. Troy, anything? Heather? Mary? Leslie? Caleb? Anna?
Just a quick, I guess, a quick update. The German exchange students have returned from Germany, and Zach was very lucky to be a participant in that exchange. And I can already tell he is a different kid. He absolutely loved every second that he spent with his host family, learning about German culture, just being away from home. I'm gonna cry. He has a whole new family in Germany, and it's just awesome. So we had a wonderful, wonderful leadership. Jolene Wyszynski was the main chaperone for the group, the leader, and she did an absolutely amazing job. They kept us updated with a blog each day with pictures and notes about what they did, and it's really awesome. So
great, thank you for sharing. All right, we'll take about a 5-minute break, and then we will convene in closed session. Thanks, everyone.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Come on! Go, Diane! Yeah, keep it going! Yeah! Go, honey!
If you love them enough to drive an hour to cheer them on as they get beat 11-0 in the rain, then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.